There is a monastery I visited once, high in the mountains of northern Thailand, where the fog never fully lifts until midday. Every morning, the monks would walk the same stone path through that fog, barefoot, silent, their robes the color of saffron dissolving into white mist. I used to watch them from a wooden bench near the meditation hall, holding a clay cup of warm ginger tea. And I remember thinking that they did not look like men searching for anything. They looked like men who had stopped searching entirely. And somehow, in the stillness of that observation, I began to wonder whether the greatest healing available to any human being is not the kind that adds something to us, but the kind that quietly, gently, removes something we were never meant to carry in the first place. To continue healing your body and soul through these ancient teachings, I invite you to join our path by subscribing to this sanctuary. Every week we gather here the way those monks gathered in that fog, not to perform wisdom, but to let it breathe through us slowly, the way morning light breathes through old temple curtains. The mind that forgets itself is not a broken mind. It is not a confused mind. It is, in the deepest Buddhist understanding, a mind that has finally loosened its grip on the exhausting story it has been telling about who it is, what it deserves, what it has lost, and what it fears. And today, across 9 insights drawn from centuries of monastery teachings and the quiet wisdom of those who sat in silence long before any of us arrived in this world, we are going to walk together into that forgetting. Not the forgetting of sleep or distraction or avoidance, the forgetting of liberation. The first insight begins with a question that a young monk once asked his teacher in a monastery outside of Kyoto. He had been meditating for 3 years and still felt restless, still felt the constant hum of thought behind every breath. And so one morning he sat before his teacher and said, "Why does my mind refuse to be quiet?" The teacher did not answer immediately. He poured 2 cups of tea, slid one across the mat, and said, "Your mind is not refusing to be quiet. Your mind is refusing to be abandoned." And there it is, the first insight. We do not suffer because our minds are too loud. We suffer because we are too loyal to them. We have confused the voice inside our heads with the self that is listening. Buddhism has always been gentle in how it delivers this truth, but it delivers it nonetheless. You are not your thoughts. You are the silence in which thoughts appear and disappear, like clouds crossing a sky that was never anything but open. The second insight comes from the bamboo forests of a retreat I attended in the mountains of Chiang Mai during a rainy season so intense that the sound of water on the roof became its own meditation. There was a teacher there, an older woman with a voice so soft you had to lean toward it, and she taught something I have never forgotten. She said that most people treat their identity the way a drowning man treats a piece of driftwood. They hold on because they believe the holding is what keeps them alive. But the driftwood, she said, is not saving you. The driftwood is just the last thing you grabbed before you realized the water was only 3 feet deep and you could stand. The self we protect so fiercely, the self made of memories and wounds and achievements and fears, is driftwood. And the moment we release it, we discover we were never drowning to begin with. We were simply afraid to let our feet touch the ground. The third insight lives in the body, because Buddhist wisdom is never only a philosophy for the intellect. It is always also a practice for the flesh and breath and bone. Right now, wherever you are, I want you to notice your shoulders. Notice whether they are pulled upward, toward your ears, in the subtle posture of someone bracing for impact. Most of us walk through life in this posture, shoulders raised, jaw slightly clenched, breath shallow, as though the next moment might arrive as a threat. This is not weakness. This is the body faithfully recording every belief the mind holds about the world. And so when the mind begins to forget itself, to release its story, the body follows. Let your shoulders fall. Let your jaw soften. Let your breath reach down past your chest and into your belly, that ancient center of gravity that monks call the hara, the place below the navel where the breath goes when the mind is no longer in charge. Stay there for just a moment. That softness you feel is not emptiness. That softness is what you are when no one is performing. The fourth insight is the one most people resist, and I say that with great compassion because I resisted it too. It is this: the mind does not forget itself through force. It forgets itself through boredom. There is a story from the Zen tradition about a student who came to a master asking how to empty his mind, and the master pointed to a nearby broom and said, "Sweep the courtyard." The student swept for an hour, then returned, and the master said, "Sweep it again." This continued for 3 days, and on the third day, midway through his sweeping, the student began to laugh. He laughed until tears ran down his face. The master walked out, looked at him and said, "There it is." What the student discovered in that repetitive, unremarkable sweeping was something profound. When the mind is given nothing interesting to hold on to, nothing to argue with, nothing to fear or desire, it eventually loses interest in itself. It puts down its own story out of sheer tedium. And in that moment of forgetting, the awareness that was always underneath the story begins to shine like sunlight through a window that has finally been cleaned. The fifth insight concerns the particular suffering of comparison, which is perhaps the most modern form of mental imprisonment. We live in an era where the mind is fed an endless stream of other people's highlights, other people's bodies, other people's achievements, and the mind, being the faithful narrator it is, immediately begins constructing a story of deficiency. I am not enough. I have not done enough. I have not become enough. In the Pali texts, this kind of mental proliferation is called papanka, and the Buddha described it as the mind spinning out from a single perception into an entire web of suffering. You see a photograph, and suddenly you are in a courtroom of your own making, are prosecuting yourself for every unlived life. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to stop noticing these things. It asks you to notice that you are noticing, and in that small, courageous act of observation, the web loses its stickiness. The mind begins to forget the prosecutor, because the prosecutor was never real to begin with. What is real is the breath. What is real is this moment. What is real is the warmth of your own presence, available to you always, asking nothing in return. The sixth insight is wrapped in one of the most beautiful images I have ever encountered in Buddhist literature. It comes from a Zen master named Dogen, who wrote in the 13th century that to study the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. I want to sit with that second part for a moment, because it contains something extraordinary. To be enlightened by all things. When the self steps back from its relentless curating of experience, when it stops labeling every moment as good or bad, useful or useless, safe or threatening, something remarkable happens. The world begins to arrive, not as a series of objects to be evaluated, but as a living presence. The sound of rain on glass becomes not background noise, but a kind of conversation. The warmth of sunlight on your forearm becomes not a minor comfort, but a complete teaching. A child laughing somewhere down the street becomes not a distraction, but a reminder that joy needs no justification. This is what the mind discovers when it forgets itself. It discovers that it is not separate from what it perceives. It discovers that the boundary between self and world was never a wall. It was always just the idea, and ideas can dissolve. The seventh insight asks us to consider the particular cruelty we practice against ourselves in the quiet hours, the moments between tasks, the space between sleep and waking, the long afternoon when nothing is scheduled, and the mind turns inward like a storm with nowhere to land. In those moments, most of us become brutal archaeologists of our own past, digging through old regrets, turning over old embarrassments, cataloging old failures with the thoroughness of someone who believes that if they just understand the wound well enough, they will finally be free of it. But in Buddhist understanding, this is not healing. This is what the tradition calls feeding the hungry ghost, the metaphorical creature with an enormous belly and a throat too narrow to swallow, always consuming, never nourished. The healing does not come from understanding the wound more deeply. It comes from turning, with tremendous gentleness, away from the excavation and toward the breath. Right now. Just the breath, the one that is happening without your permission, without your effort, without your memory or your future or your name attached to it. Just the breath, moving through a body that has been faithfully breathing since the moment you arrived in this world, asking nothing of you but the willingness to be present for it. The eighth insight is perhaps the most quietly revolutionary of all, and it comes not from a monastery or a text, but from a conversation I had with an elderly Thai woman who had been practicing meditation for over 50 years. I asked her what had changed in her mind over those decades, and she was silent for a long time. Then she said something I will carry with me always. She said, "I used to have opinions about everything. Now I just have observations." That single sentence contains the entire arc of a contemplative life. Opinions require a self to defend them. Observations require only awareness to hold them. When the mind forgets itself, it does not become empty or cold or indifferent. It becomes something far more spacious than that. It becomes a place where experience can pass through without being captured, labeled, sentenced, and stored. The Buddhist teachers call this quality equanimity, and they are careful to distinguish it from detachment. Detachment is turning away. Equanimity is standing so fully in your own center that you can turn toward everything, toward grief, toward joy, toward confusion, toward beauty, without being knocked from your feet. It is the posture of the monk in the fog, present but not consumed, soft but not collapsed. The ninth and final insight brings us back to the body one more time, because the body is always where this journey ends and begins. Place your hand over your heart for a moment, not as a gesture, but as a genuinely felt act of contact. Feel the warmth there. Feel, if you can, the very slight movement of your heartbeat beneath your palm. This body has carried you through every moment of your life, through every loss and every breakthrough, through every night when sleep would not come, through every morning when you were not sure how you would continue. And it has done all of this without ever asking whether you are worthy of being carried. The heart does not check your credentials before it beats. The lungs do not review your history before they expand. The body, in its faithful and unconditional functioning, is already practicing the deepest teaching of Buddhism. It is already operating without ego, without judgment, without the need to construct a story about itself. And when the mind finally begins to forget itself, when it loosens its grip on identity and narrative and performance, it is not descending into something unknown. It is rising to meet what the body has always already known, that life does not require a self to justify it. That presence does not require a story to validate it. That you, right now in this breath, in this warmth beneath your palm, are already whole, already home, already exactly what you were before the world began teaching you to doubt it. There is a practice in certain Zen monasteries called kinhin, which is walking meditation, performed so slowly that each step takes a full breath. The monks who practice it say that after some time, something strange happens. You forget which step you are on. You forget how long you have been walking. You forget, in the most delicate and liberating sense, where you are going. And in that forgetting, the walking becomes something more than movement. It becomes arrival. Every step is arrival. Every breath is arrival. There is no destination separate from the walking itself. This is the mind that forgets itself. Not the mind that goes blank or shuts down or dissociates from the world. The mind that forgets its destination and discovers with something close to wonder that it has been arriving continuously, without interruption, since the very beginning. If anything in this journey has landed in you today, I ask you simply to carry it lightly, not as a teaching to master, not as a philosophy to defend, but as a small stone in your pocket, something you can touch in the moments when the mind grows loud again, when the story returns, when the shoulders rise and the breath grows shallow. Touch the stone. Remember that there is a mind underneath the mind, a silence underneath the noise, a self underneath the self that needs no protecting, no defending, no performance. Remember the monks in the fog. Remember the woman with 50 years of observations. Remember the bamboo forest in the rain, and the teacher with the soft voice who reminded us that the water was always only 3 feet deep. Remember that you can stand. You have always been able to stand. You were simply, for a time, holding on. And when you are ready, let go.